Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling Why Can't Both the Integrity of Women's Sports and Trans Rights Be Protected? So, I'm responding to some comments made in today's majority report by Emma Vigeland and also some others in the studio there. And they were commenting on a video made by what likely is a conservative or right wing group in Georgia, where the NCAA women's swimming event had occurred recently, had occurred last week, and there was a trans athlete who won a medal in it there, and she was actually favored in other events as well, and so it's there is this controversy, which is not just about this event in Georgia or this NCAA women's swimming event, about whether trans women, so men who are transitioning to being a woman, or boys, whatever, or adolescents, have an advantage over women or girls who always were female, and so in terms of their athletic performance, and so this. In the context of the show today, Emma Vigeland, who is in her late 20s, was adamant about that. In some sense, the women's sports would need to lump it. In other words, they would need to accept for the mental health and the safety of and the mental health, basically, or the good feeling of trans women athletes, that they would need to be totally included in all women's sports. There should be no differentiation between them and women who were born as women. And so, and this is I felt like maybe there's a little bit of a generational divide here, but I felt like there was no that women's sports is not only felt. I know that women's sports is also involved in defining. They need to define women because in women's sports, if men play the same sport, in many sports, not all of them, having male biochemistry, certainly in some period of your life, and again, there needs to be more research because transsexuality is a fairly new phenomenon, and certainly it's prevalent. It's not a very prevalent thing at all. There's not very many trans people, and there's also not many trans athletes. So, and let alone trans women athletes, but there are some. So, but anyway, the women's sports have needed to define the limits or the boundaries of who is a woman, and also because of the advantages of having testosterone in your bloodstream, or certain levels of testosterone in your bloodstream that are elevated or higher than what women typically have. And so this defining, and the World Doping Agency is very much involved in this, because doping for both men and for women involves, among other things, elevating androgens in your body, and therefore, in order to avoid cheating in sports, the World Doping Agency tests people, to see if they, have been using steroids or other performance-enhancing drugs. So, in this discussion this morning, or this afternoon at the Majority Report, this data wasn't included in the discussion. It became a very politicized discussion, and I mean, I'm not saying it isn't political, about how the right wing will use the trans issue to bludgeon the left, essentially, and and it's to me it seems like, well, there is some grounds to bludgeon the left in it. It's not as clear cut as Emma was suggesting, because there are two parties involved here, or two primarily involved parties. One are the both trans women athletes. Now, trans male athletes will have, I mean, now some of them may also dope in some sense, and they might overdope themselves with their own the hormones that they take to transition from female to male. But the it's far more likely that that trans women might have an advantage in certain sports based on their formerly male biochemistry, or even currently male biochemistry, and so it needs to be established. And there are studies that show that women who have higher testosterone levels, in other words, women who are not trans but who just naturally have higher testosterone levels, have advantages in athletic performance. So not universally, and not every woman who has a higher testosterone level, but that it's basically a matter of statistics. So so this is for me, a hill that the left should not try to die on, for a number of reasons. And it's not because I don't think that we should have trans rights and acceptance of trans people, and attempting to integrate them in our society as much as possible. But I think that there needs to be a recognition that there certainly needs to be a study period to figure out what are the advantages in what sports to having a biologically male birth, and then transitioning. And so I think that there would be some advantages, just from common sense, having observed, sports like tennis and other sports where men and women play in their own categories, but different. The men's tennis versus women's tennis is quite a different game. I mean, it's not entirely different, but it has a different pace and so forth and so on. And it shows you that there are advantages to having the male biology in. Not universally, obviously, there are many women who can beat most men in tennis, but at the elite levels, it's going to be the other way around. So, and in most cases, but anyway, and this is where I think that one could have a position that involves supporting trans rights and trans inclusion, but also allowing women's sports to still regulate and control levels of testosterone, and potentially with the new phenomenon, or the newer phenomenon of transitioning, that that we study in some sense, and we allow for whether there are statistically, and this is not always, that there's an advantage to being a trans woman, and therefore we're depriving women who were born women of the achievement, the recognition that they have based on having XX chromosomes from day one in their lives, and so forth and so on, and having fewer androgens in there, and lower concentrations of androgens in their body, just because of how their birth and their sex at birth. So Um, the so this the challenge of women's sports in a way is to show excel within those parameters. Okay, and I think that there needs to be a concerted effort in our society to welcome and embrace trans people and trans athletes, but we shouldn't do that in the course of depriving women athletes of the achievement that they, deserve based on their performance. And obviously their training and so forth and so on. Um, I think that the idea or the hurdle of saying that trans women are the same as women entirely is just, it's foolishness. It's just not sensible. It's all of our histories, my history, your history, everybody's history influences us in some way or another, and we're not necessarily bound by our history entirely. We can make a new history, but we also can't entirely erase our histories. So the idea that a trans woman or a trans man, but mostly like in the case of athletics for trans women, the idea that they have the right to erase their entire biological history in this pursuit of athletic glory in a category that has somewhat lesser, or in terms of like swimming and so forth and so on, whatever it is, that the records are a little bit slower than the male categories, then so forth and so on, and again, no disrespect to women athletes at all, but it just simply there are two different biologies going on there in general as statistically normed, and there's also intersex, and intersex has existed throughout the history of humanity. So it's not, sexuality, sex is not binary, but for the purpose of doing these sports, you need to create a binary if you're going to have a category where the performance expectations are slightly lower, okay, in terms of the times. If you're talking about sports that are timed, or or even sports that involve a certain kind of physicality, whatever it is. So and it shouldn't be. It's not a disrespect to trans people, to trans athletes. It's not disrespect to women athletes to say that, even though it might appear that if you have this maximalist position, which I think, or absolutist position, that to be trans means that you're identical, that your decision to be a different sex, despite how you were born, is totally totally makes you identical to someone who is born with XX chromosomes and so forth, so on. And that just is against reality. And I think the left needs to understand that there is a compromise to be made here, that we can't, and it's not just even the far left. They're sort of the liberal left. This is an identity issue that is often used as a litmus test for how sensitive are you, how, and this kind of, this kind of litmus test issue of your sensitivity, and to show how extremely righteous you are in the woke universe is a stupid strategy. It doesn't. It's literally. I mean, it's good to be sensitive to other people. It's good to support the rights of minorities, but it's also good to support the rights of minorities without trashing the rights of a still larger group that is also oppressed, by the way, women, Okay, and so um, they're and I am not supporting the phobia, the transphobia here that bathroom police are talking about, and so forth and so on. No one in any bathroom really looks at people's genitalia anyway, or they shouldn't, And so um, the uh, that's some of the more ridiculous aspects of the anti-trans activism that we see, or coming from the right wing. But the left wing cannot walk into this buzzsaw. It's a buzzsaw, and it's a buzzsaw because it's based on ignorance of sports and of human biology and the binary two. If all sports were open, it wouldn't matter at all. In other words, if we have one open category for everybody, and I'm talking about an individual sport, or for that matter, team sports. It's like everybody plays together. There's no women's leagues. It's just men and women, whoever. Okay, then this problem is solved. Okay, there's no other than some doping standard about performance enhancing drugs for all people. People shouldn't care about whether they're born with XX, XY, and they're transitioning it or not, whatever. But with these two categories, you immediately are creating a problem and overthrowing. So you're hurting some girls, okay, girl athletes. Now you could say, well, it's people shouldn't care so much about athletic performance and so forth and so on. But you're saying then, well, you're caring about the athletic performance of these new trans athletes, these trans men athletes. You're saying, let's give them a shake. It's like, well, give the girls a shake as well in terms of the born women, okay, or the XX chromosome women, because you're dismissing them, and so I just it's an entirely losing debate, and I think policies need to be worked out, and accommodations need to be worked out that give these trans women athletes a comfort and an honor and an acceptance, in sport. And I'm thinking, certainly playing intramural sports, even some team sports, but also just inventing your own sport, okay? Literally going out and doing some kind of sport like performance, that doesn't involve a competition where you're taking away from other people the potential of or you may be taking away their potential for some kind of glory based on their performance within the constraints of these two categories of sport that we currently have. And and there's also more than two in terms of juniors and juniors and seniors in terms of the pros or the minor leagues, so to speak, versus major leagues. But what we're talking now about is really this two-sex model of sports. So I think that it's good that we have women's sports, and I think that maybe there's some hard decisions to be made and discussions to be had, and the discussions need to be made in a way that includes all these parties and all parties involved, because it's just, and also includes science and a scientific study of this situation, because just to declare that one is, just to invent oneself and then again with an advantage to hurt other people's chances to win some glory, it isn't fair. So and I think there again our society, there's a lot of transphobia going on, and some of it has to do with, I think, a lot of it is just what I call the cult of the deadly phallus, this sexual insecurity and the sense of, in times of great stress, people become focused on they fetishize the phallus and so forth and so on. And so this trans issue has a lot to do with people's deep anxieties about masculinity and femininity and so forth and so on. And these are very, very deep and important issues that need to be discussed, and they just can't be pushed aside for the sake of, for them. I mean, this is a huge issue that expands many, many biologically XY and XX, whatever, people who are cisgendered people, who are also in great anxiety about sexuality and about harm and there's this whole the QAnon phenomenon that is about a sexual moral panic, among other things, or it has that built into it, as well as some other fanciful weird stuff. So around this issue, there isn't a cut and dried resolution, and the left should say there isn't a cut and dried resolution, that there needs to be more study, and we need to be inclusive, but also protecting women's rights as who are working at a little bit of a disadvantage statistically, but again, I think there needs to be more papers written by biologists and sports medicine people and so forth and so on about how, whether if there's no issue they hear and it's just a matter of randomly some trans women are better and some are worse, and which is true anyway. I mean, that's already true. But if they are in their numbers, are they statistically more likely to excel, and therefore to push down and push out women who haven't had the advantage of testosterone in their bodies during their training lives. So it's, we need to create a society where people feel included for not necessarily being the gold medalist, or the silver medalist for that matter, so that is much more important than, and that includes trans people and includes other kinds of people. The focus on this one group, which is, it's a new group, and it's been definitely targeted, and there's a lot of mental health issues related to it, the stigma and the opprobrium and the anxiety and the lack of sort of a place for trans people, or the feeling that they have a lack of place, and so this is all very there are hard issues there, but also you don't want to, in helping these people and helping people who are trans feel accepted and loved, we also don't want to unlove the people who are XX chromosome athletes. So anyway, I hope this discussion is a little bit helpful in sort of trying to broaden out the issues, and it's a lot of it's about the performance, the do or die performance ethic of our society, and in this case, a kind of perverse reversal of it, or not reversal, but a maintenance of what should be a much less important aspect of our lives, but it's still, unfortunately, in our sports obsessed society, very important. So anyway, so I hope you can share in the comments any thoughts related to this video, and also if you liked it, please like the video, and also if you're liking the content that I am offering here on Politics 2100, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.